Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Monday, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to talk about Mercury's upcoming conjunction to Jupiter this week and what to watch for, as well as a few ideas spiritually and philosophically about this transit that may help us through the week. So I'm going to put the real-time clock up and give you a picture of this right now. You can see that right now Mercury is within the engagement range, which means within 3 degrees, and it is closing fast. So we're going to see this conjunction coming together by about Thursday of this week through Friday. That's the main day, Thursday, Friday, the 4th and 5th of March. So you can see them crossing over right there. Really on Thursday, they're hitting the perfection, but you'll feel this actually all the way through about Sunday as Mercury's separating within 3 degrees. You could even go to next Monday. So about a week of having Jupiter and Mercury as some of the leading players on the cosmic stage right now. The other thing that's exciting this week that we'll talk about later in the week is Mars's entrance into Gemini. We'll take a little bit of a look at Mars in Gemini. And we'll also be going through, you can see coming in over the weekend, there's a last quarter moon. This one is interesting because it's hitting, it's going through the south node of the moon. So there's a couple of good things to look forward to this week, as well as this transit. All right, but at any rate, so you can see Mercury and Jupiter getting together. One of the very interesting features of this transit is the fact that both are co-present with their host Saturn. So this is not your typical Mercury-Jupiter in the sense that it is heavily toned by or sort of influenced by Saturn. So Saturn could clip its wings a little bit, and I want to talk about what that means, both practically in terms of what you might watch for this week, and then a little deeper philosophically. So let's talk about the combination of Mercury and Jupiter. Here you have two planets that are natural contraries. All the signs that Jupiter rules, Mercury rules the opposite signs. So they're in what is called exile, or sometimes referred to as detriment, when they are in each other's signs. When you take Mercury and put it into Pisces or Sagittarius, Jupiter's two traditional signs, then you have a condition where Mercury has to answer to Jupiter, its planetary opposite. And if you put Jupiter in Virgo or Gemini, it's the same thing. It's in its detriment or exile. The reason for this is that whereas Jupiter tends toward, broadly speaking, toward unity, toward law, toward order, toward piety, or toward everything which is official and cohesive, like the legal system or a government or religious orthodoxy or the kind of unification of, say, an English department in a university or something like that. Mercury is more of the bringer of deconstruction, chaos, analysis, skepticism, doubt. Mercury is always going back and forth, back and forth. And in that motion, there's something very different than Jupiter, who has this kind of grand, slow, unifying presence in the sky. So the two are like natural opposites in some ways, but they complement one another as well. They're like two sides of the same archetypal coin. And you'll notice this in ancient astrology, that planets always come in opposite archetypal pairings. So anyway, let's talk about some of the things that you may notice this week with Mercury and Jupiter combined. Now, when they're conjoined, you're going to see that their qualities blend together rather than, say, a square or an opposition where they're going to be in more of a contentious or challenging relationship with one another, or even a trine or a sextile where they're harmonizing, but yet they're still apart somehow. When you get them in the same sign and their bodies come together in the sky, then you have this idea of a blending or commingling of their qualities. So you could call this, these are some of the phrases that come to mind, broad-mindedness, sort of big or broad-minded, that's Mercury, Jupiter. You could have the excitement or the enthusiasm of some new subject or an idea that one becomes suddenly possessed by. You have a comprehensive analysis of something, taking apart an entire system so that you can understand it completely. That's a kind of Mercury, Jupiter. You also have teachers or teaching that help put all of the parts of something together into a whole, or perhaps even a new whole. You have innovations that are big and maybe even groundbreaking. Mercury was traditionally associated with invention and inventors. You also have the idea, there's a lot of financial or almost like legal or contractual implications, big deals, successful negotiations, contracts, getting the thumbs up, getting an approval, someone saying yes to you, getting good news, getting a check in the mail, just the kind of good, fortunate, expansive delivery of information or news or something like that, a gift. You may also find that it's easier to find who your mental, intellectual, or spiritual teachers or allies are, or that you are very inspired by someone, or that you're starting a new course in something. There's a lot of positivity and optimism in the sky, but also overconfidence and potentially excessive mental or intellectual ambition or pride. Inspiration and enthusiasm. There's this idea with the word enthusiasm that you're kind of possessed with by a god within, and that you become this channel through which the force of some archetype becomes very present. And that could be a good thing. And, sometimes it's going to translate into people who are, let's just say, at the worst, kind of like someone who has a loud megaphone, overconfident, overly enthusiastic, unrealistic. On the other hand, sometimes it's going to present us with a huge abundance of different things. The particularities of Mercury become many and become big with Jupiter, and we can become flooded with information or ideas. Overstatement, meaning we can and over-promising and under-delivering, all of which happen with Mercury Jupiter. I tell it's the greatest thing ever, and is it? Isn't it? Also, sometimes positive thinking, it's going to get you far with Mercury Jupiter. Sometimes positive thinking is unrealistic thinking with Mercury Jupiter conjunction. Sometimes you have people who are very powerful orators. They have ability to speak publicly very well, or to be very inspiring somehow. So this is just a range of things that you might see this week with Mercury's conjunction to Jupiter. Now, one of the things that I wanted to shift into today, in terms of, I should add one more thing, which would be sometimes you're going to see be careful of buying things that are too big, or almost like what do I want to say? Overspending or overselling something, or being sold on something because someone's being really like over the top dramatic or something like that. It would be not a good time, for example, for someone to go to a used car lot and have someone maybe like way oversell you on something. That could happen. Now, no offense to car salesmen. I have a few friends in my past who sell cars, so no offense. Anyway, here's the thing. I've gotten a few emails in the past couple of weeks, interestingly, all about the same topic, as Mercury's been really close to Jupiter, and it's been about the power of positive thinking. And I'm going to read you just a little excerpt from an email that I got. I'm not going to mention this person's name, but just something that you might find interesting. So this is someone who was wondering about whether or not astrology is deterministic. And they said this. They said, it got me thinking, yes, the birth chart is deterministic. However, the determinations are probabilities, possibilities, and opportunities. Astrology is a sacred map, that is a compassionate sketch of possibilities and opportunities, pointing us back to our true self and to the anchoring God whose name is love. This sacred map isn't fatalistic, it's not deterministic, etc. And kind of asking me what I thought about this. And so I just thought, first of all, as someone who's paying attention to the transits in the sky, I'm always aware of which archetypes might be constellating when people seem to suddenly get high on something, or I seem to get high on something, or a lot of questions start coming in that all have something in common, or I start seeing a lot of clients that all have something in common, usually there's something mirroring that in the sky. And so I've received a lot of questions about positive thinking and free will versus determinism in astrology, and possibility versus fate and stuff like that. So I wanted to say something about that today, as a little mini sermon from the stars. So, is astrology all about possibilities, opportunities, and probabilities, or is it deterministic and fated? And what I want to say about this comes from ancient astrologers, and the way that they wrote and the way that they talked about things, and broadly speaking, the view of fate and free will that was common in the ancient world. So what I want to say is that there's this dichotomy between fate or determined events in the future and almost like opportunities, possibilities, probabilities, and free will is really a false dichotomy from the standpoint of ancient astrology. Let me try to explain why. So the way that ancient astrologers looked at things, whether you're looking at the Upanishads in India or some of what Plato said in the West, both traditions that philosophically influenced astrologers for sure, is that in this universe, every material being has free choices to make, right? So we're making free choices all the time. And a good amount of our experience is wide open, and there's probabilities and possibilities and opportunities galore. But the choices that we have available to us, as well as those that we are most likely to actually make, are shaped and or limited, you could say, by the environment, which in and of itself is rather mysteriously something that has also been created through previous choices. So you have to take into account the transmigration of the soul paradigm that ancient astrologers had. This is not our first rodeo. We're not born a blank slate. We're not born with the world completely wide open to us. The kshetra or field of a soul is determined in many ways by the physical form that we're born into. A bird has a different kshetra than I do. It can fly and I can't, right? So we have a range of options and possibilities and probabilities and so forth that we can make free choices within. And that environment, the body that we're born into, and the range of choices available to us, and the different kinds of things we can do with our free will is shaped by inborn limitations. And those inborn limitations are said to also come from previous choices that the soul has made in its journey. So in that sense, many people will falsely sort of believe that freedom means freedom from any kind of consequence or any kind of limitation. But there's always these sequences of reactions that they're always being set in place by our choices, right? So that we receive the results of our actions in the future as we are also making new open choices in the future. It's not just one or the other. It's not that it's either open or it's closed, right? In some ways, for example, you could think about it like a garden. In a garden, there's many different things growing on different cycles and timelines. Things will blossom at different times, and that has to do with the nature of each of the plants in the garden and the nature of their life cycles and what is unique to them. So all of us have, because we're born into a world where forms work in predictable cycles, and there are sequences of cause and effect, that when a soul, which is by nature free, is born into a world of forms, the soul is inherently participating in the limitations, the laws, and the sequences of cause and effect within a world of forms that's just going like a great circular clock with many different hands, right? So there's all these circles and cycles of time that are governing the unfolding of events in time, and we're born into it like it's a river that we're floating along, and we're born into one of the forms that's governed by the rules and laws of material nature. And so in that sense, our free will is always interacting with the laws of nature and with the cycles of nature. And also that we have to remember that in a more idiosyncratic way, our previous free choices are going to create patterns of circumstance and outcome in this lifetime. And even, you can see this on a small level. What to speak of past lifetimes, you can see this in this lifetime. For example, if you smoke for 20 years, even though you may realize that you don't want to smoke and you want to be free from the effects of smoking, it's very possible that you could still get cancer even if you quit. You could, you know what I mean? So because there's momentum and there's these grooves of pattern or habituated actions that we take, then there are pattern and habituated outcomes or circumstances that we receive as a result. And some are very changeable, some are not so changeable, and some are really unchangeable, meaning that it's really hard or takes a really long time to change. So we also have to remember that so it's a very complex picture that ancient astrologers give us. We're born into a world where there's all of these laws of cause and effect and cycles and circles of nature. We're born into forms, even though we're free beings. And so there's parameters that shape, limit, and define what kinds of choices and outcomes are available to us, what to speak of previous choices and ingrained habits and modes of being and people and things that we associate with and do that are going to shape and define not only our environment, but also certain kinds of outcomes that we're going to get in this lifetime. And then also they condition us. And in some ways, to really be free, there's a lot of things that we have to overcome. We simply have to overcome different kinds of conditioning before we can actually even understand what it means to have a different set of choices or options. So for example, if let's just say again, you smoke for 20 years, and no offense to my smokers out there, I have friends who smoke and stuff like that, but if you smoke for 20 years, even if you quit, it's possible that there will be a lot of very limiting or confining things that could still impact your health in the year ahead. And it may take a while, maybe even into the next lifetime, before you really start to feel that you're free of the grip of some of the consequences of those ingrained choices. So for ancient astrologers, they were really thinking about this in terms of the long game. They didn't see karma for the most part. Some karma could change very quickly. Some karma could change, but it took a while. And then some karma was really deeply ingrained and it wasn't going to change very easily at all. So, and also very clearly, it was not easy to discern or delineate which kind of karma and how ingrained something was, right? So it's like that can be very mysterious. For some people, they can quit smoking right away after getting addicted for a year or two. For other people, it's like a lifetime long battle or something like that. Okay, so at any rate, possibilities, in other words, to kind of put a point on it, possibilities are always in this material world, as we're spirit souls who are free, but born into a material world that's conditioned and that moves through repeating cycles of cause and effect. Possibilities in this world are always in a relationship or a kind of dance with limitation. And it's not one or the other. It's always both, relating to one another simultaneously. So freedom in the material world always involves the relationship between freedom and limitation. And we are always working with the perpetuation of the reactions from our previous choices and how those previous choices condition how we will actually think about or make quote unquote free will choices. So it's like previous choices shape future choices and shape our sense of what freedom is or what's actually possible. And they're always working in tandem like that. And so one of the things that changing your karma within this framework could be fast, it could be medium, or it could be slow, depending on what type of karma. It's a bit like, I've heard the analogy used before, like if your car goes off the road slightly and your two right-hand side tires go off into a rut, it's like it takes a little bit to like get it back up. And you know what that's like, where it's like a little like, ooh, this feels a little dangerous. I got to make sure that I do this carefully, right? So getting back up out of the rut takes a while. It takes a kind of remodulating. And in the span of an eternal spirit soul's sojourn in the material universe, ancient astrologers were quite content for us to have to work out of certain kinds of habituated patterns and reactions over many lifetimes. So but remember, they believe that those patterns are not just because the universe is impersonal, mechanistic, determined. No, they believe that the material universe shows order, and cause and effect is a way of showing that there's an inborn rationality and order and beauty behind all things. Sometimes it's mysterious to us. We don't quite understand how we came to be in a certain situation or pattern in our lives, or how to get out of it. That can be really tough. But to them, all of the patterns in the universe that are cycling and circling are always respecting and responding to the choices that we make, right? So there's the limitation or the parameter comes in a way as a response to choice. And so choice is primary, choice is fundamental, free will is fundamental. The response from the universe is a way of keeping harmony and order in response to innumerable beings' free choices. So it's not, so when people are looking at astrology and they're being like, geez, it's so predictive and deterministic, it's like, well, the universe has to have some order, right? Like, really simply, this is kind of like, this is part of why I'm talking all about this, is because this is such a Jupiter Mercury kind of teaching. I'll come back around to that in a minute. But so the system isn't fatalistic or deterministic. It's a system that responds to and offers a kind of an orderedness and a cohesiveness. That's Jupiter, right? In relation to free choices. Now, interestingly, Mercury was associated with the first house in ancient astrology. It rejoiced in the first house and was associated with the agency of the individual soul. And so when Mercury and Jupiter come together, there is some sense of wanting to be a part of some larger truth or larger order and to align oneself with it. That's why you see things like great teachers or people getting interested in new subjects or wanting to learn or find a guru, or because the desire is to align the soul's intelligence with an understanding of higher truth and higher order. And it was that, for ancient astrologers, that was thought of in some ways as a gateway to mental freedom, because understanding the world is how you become free within it, right? So it's knowledge and it's wisdom, in a sense, that helps us to understand how possibility and limitation are always co-present. They're always working together, and the wise person understands that. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says very clearly that the wise person is one who sees action in inaction and inaction in action. And so, and if you dig into that, it's very similar to several verses in the Tao Te Ching that are also telling us things like this, that don't be someone who is always seeking out possibility, freedom, kind of this open broad-mindedness and sort of shunning limitation or determinism or laws or rules or strictures or limitation, because they're two sides of the same coin. And so, the wise person is one who sees each in the other. And that's why ancient astrologers also said that our freedom, our real freedom, is not found in the dichotomy between worldly freedom versus worldly restriction, or worldly freedom versus the laws and parameters and limitations of the world. So as long as we go looking for our sense of freedom from like, well, I'm going to be free from a limit, right? That's the beginning of a cycle that in this world will eventually lead to a limit again, right? And round it goes. So we have to look for freedom in something different than this. And that's my one sort of the one response that I try to explain to my students when the fate, determinism versus free will and possibility type of arguments come up. So spiritual freedom isn't the same as material freedom. A few points to make about this. Spiritual freedom begins with this recognition that no matter what karmic circumstances we are in, however closed or open our material world may appear to us, or however multiple or variegated our options feel to us or seem to us, the same freedom spiritually is present at all times, because our freedom is in who and what we are, not in what we do or receive or do or can't receive, or how faded or open the material world is. our spiritual freedom is actually who we are. And that is the freedom, and the way that we enact that or embody that in this world as we're here is found in the freedom that we have at any point in time, no matter our circumstance, to remember our eternal nature and to remember our divine source and to commune with it intentionally. The two rules, for example, in Krishna Bhakti that summarize the entire teaching is always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna, right? So, always we have the freedom in any moment, in any circumstance whatsoever, however free or limited it may appear in some materialized conception of freedom or limitation, to commune with God in the heart, to commune with our soul, to commune with our higher self. When we commune with our divine nature and our source, that's when we access spiritual freedom from the standpoint of ancient astrologers. In different ways, this is talked about in the East and the West, but it's very similar. And this kind of freedom is always going to transcend the worldly dichotomy between material freedom and bondage. Because when you start communing with the spirit soul, you experience yourself as free, happy, you experience truth and bliss and beauty, so to speak, whether your material circumstance feels or seems relatively more or less free or open. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't real limitations in this world that are really painful, and that there's not a component to spiritual life that isn't about helping people to alleviate burdens that could make it more challenging to practice spiritual life. This is why one of the main goals of yoga, yoga asana, for example, the physical postures of yoga, is to keep the body really clean and open so that you can sit and meditate longer and commune longer. So if the world is full of ignorance and passion and darkness and oppression and things like that, it is going, for a lot of people who are already more materially conditioned and they're struggling to practice spiritual life, those conditions aren't helping. And so there's also this concomitant dimension of spiritual life that has to do with alleviating the suffering of other souls. But it's not because the alleviation of material suffering is the answer. It's because through the alleviation of material suffering, a soul can more clearly see who they really are and take to spiritual life, take to the moment by moment remembrance of who they are. So we need clean space to meditate, right? Well, the world needs a clean space if we're to become meditative as people. So that's where the impetus comes to deal with the oppression of the world. Some people will hear this and they'll think that it's somehow, some kind of allowance or dismissal of suffering or something like that. At any rate, there is no pre-qualification or prerequisite for spiritual life, however, and this is really important because there's no birth chart lesson, you guys have heard me say this before, that we have to accomplish first before we can take to spiritual life, right? That's a big red herring that's very modern. It's like this idea that there's some kind of adventure that you're here to have a quest and a journey and complete and realize all of these life missions, like it's an elaborate, role-playing game or something. And then when you do, you get these spiritual merit badges or something like that. And that the birth chart is here to go tell you what to do, or, it has some inborn sense of like objectives, like it's mission impossible. And, here's your mission. Should you choose to accept it, it's in the birth chart. And, this birth chart will self-destruct in 3 minutes if you don't do it. There's no lesson that earns us real freedom because we already are that freedom, right? So, and everybody knows this, I think. It's just, we need to be reminded of it. So the freedom that we want is a choice that we make as soon as we start to see through this struggle between limitation and freedom, and we recognize as spirit souls that we are free within that dance. There's always going to be a dance between limitation and freedom in the material universe. Always. So how do we start to perceive, if every day we recognize there's nothing I can do or accomplish here that is going to lead me to the place that I need to go, which I can do right now, I can do anytime. There is no prerequisite classes I need to have taken. There is no mission I need to have accomplished. There's nothing I need to have gotten better at. It's not like that. Any moment I can just say, I am choosing today to commune with my divine source. Most people, before they have a spiritual sadhana, like forms of practice that have been passed down, they'll just sit and they'll be with themselves and they'll just listen to what's going on inside and they'll hold space for it. Then they start to feel like there's something in me that's wise and eternal, an old being, or, like a soul. And it's holding space. It's a mediating ground for my experiences. And in that space, if you sit there long enough over and over, you start to recognize that that space doesn't just exist in me. It exists in all beings. And you start to realize that that same mediating ground, that same soul exists in all things, that there is such a thing as a super soul or a source, a divine source that is shared and spread out in all beings. And it's individual to me, but it's also in everything. You start to commune with that, and people do that. Then, along the way, we give it words. We call it prayer. But that choice to do that is the actual definition of freedom, is to participate in that. And the overflow of that is generally that we start to feel compassion for other souls, because we see that people who aren't doing that, who aren't taking the time, are struggling. And it tends to be those people who are always really concerned about the difference between freedom or restriction, because they're associating material options and different kinds of material outcomes with happiness. And that's not where happiness is. That happiness is in the communing, which we can do anywhere and anytime, always. And that's the opportunity we're given in a lifetime. Think of it. We have sometimes upwards of 80 to 100 years, some of us, to take advantage of life, for it not to be a simple rat race or a constant battle between how free am I, what kinds of options do I have, what am I creating or trying to get that might please me in the material sense, or how restricted or limited am I, and how much pain or suffering do I feel because of it. So the spiritualist looks at the world of people doing that and feels compassion for them. Like, that sucks. Like, don't do that, Well, we do it, and we have to feel compassion because we recognize that we did it prior to having some kind of spiritual communion practice in our lives, or spiritual communion as a way of life. And this should be a way of life. It's not just some ritual. It's not just some practice. The Apostle Paul said we should pray without ceasing. This is the same attitude taken by yogis. It's taken by Buddhists. It's taken. You look at the way that Thich Nhat Hanh lived his life, or look at the way that our great luminaries of all different traditions live their life. They live their life that, rather than being caught up in a circle that's always vacillating between limitation and freedom, they're walking in a circle of remembrance. They're walking in circles, circumambulating, right? They've got beads. You know what I mean? It's different. So, okay. Anyway, so what do limitation and freedom end up looking like from the standpoint of this space? And remember that we're talking about a Mercury-Jupiter transit that loves possibility, loves openness, loves freedom, loves positivity, but it's in Saturn's sign still, with Saturn co-present. So what does limitation look like? And we've talked about this a bunch already with Uranus and Saturn. Limitation from the standpoint of regular spiritual practice, when your life becomes a moving prayer, then limitation starts to look like the particular or separate forms that God takes. Limitation becomes the tangible, separate pieces of God's voice. And those tangible, because limitation, one of the things that limitations does is it separates us. It says no to an object of our desire, or it sets up barriers or boundaries. And we could say the limitations or the restrictions that come in from the standpoint of someone who's communing with God. Even the I Ching says this, right? It's a totally different philosophy. You could even take God out of the equation, but the limitation becomes the presence of the Tao. It becomes the voice of God. It becomes mercy. It becomes love. It becomes compassion. It becomes play. And you see it that way because you're communing. Because you're communing with who you are that is free, the limitation is experienced as a kind of tangible expression of God in separation, right? And then what does freedom look like? On the other hand, material freedom, openness, possibility starts to be experienced as a form of unity, of merging the one into the other, so that they come together. And of course, everyone likes that more, right? It's very appealing. But remember that in the material sense, the separation and the unity keep coming in and out, keep coming in and out. And there's a real impatience and inflexibility to allowing for that coming and going of unity and separation. It's like we're so allergic to it. And in many traditions that if we're allergic to the vacillations of material nature, if we can't come to learn to see the play of God in all of them, it's understood in many different traditions as a kind of spiritual childhood, or a kind of almost like an allergic reaction that we need to learn to overcome, right? So as we practice communing with source and soul on a regular basis, we see that we're never actually closer to or farther away from God, whether we're going through a phase of separation or of relative union. And the material circumstances in the world start to reflect that, so that whether something appears more faded or constricted or confined, there we see God, there we see soul, there we see source. Whether everything feels really unified and great, there we see soul, there we see source. So in this sense, that this, in the same way, for the spiritualists, the dichotomy between fate and free will is always collapsing, right? Even as we go through the dance of life, where some things feel very fated and kind of heavy, and we feel more restricted, we feel more confined, or whether everything feels very open and possible. For the spiritualist, it's like that dichotomy is being collapsed, even as the blades of the wheel spin. So you could think about it like the spiritualist is often said. This is actually said quite literally in some ancient yogic texts, that it's like a potter's wheel. If you're pumping the electricity into the thing and it's spinning it, then if you take your foot off, the pot will still spin. There's no electricity coming up into it, but it's still spinning. Or a fan blade whose wheels keep on turning even after you've unplugged it. The spiritualist has unplugged the fan from the wall. The blades are still turning, but you're not experiencing it with the same. You're not addicted to that cycle anymore. You're in a sense, you've disidentified from it, but you're so because you're identified with the eternal loving source that is in you and in all things. The way you experience that wheel is what changes. So here's a few things that can help you if you're, this week, if you think about some of the spiritual lessons of a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Saturn's sign. So there's the idea that I want to expand, I want to do something big. Okay, well, take your time, right? There's something about eroticize the movement with what seems like it is contrary to it, right? So, okay, unlimited possibility, positivity, growth. Let me do this big thing. I'm so excited. Okay, introduce slowing down, taking your time, allowing for some opportunities to pass, bringing in a healthy level of sacred doubt that checks the confidence but doesn't eliminate the confidence, that plays with the confidence, right? It's bringing in the negative not as a canceling of the positive, but as a way of saying it doesn't, like, I don't want to be swept away by my positivity and my sense of opportunities and growth if it means forgetting things that are really, really, really important, like my soul, like source. So take your time, slow things down, let some opportunities pass, find the yes in a no, right? Find the no in the yes. Play with that a little bit. When some big opportunity comes along, grieve a little bit. It's, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Well, there's nothing more rewarding in life than getting a little bit curious about why something is so exciting. It doesn't mean you have to clip the wings and never fly again, but you can just take it down a few notches and see how that changes the texture and deepens the flavor of the joy or the possibility or the probability, or you know what I mean, or the openness. When we see possibility and inevitability as equally interesting or curious, we stay curious about something. Every time that you think, oh my God, what an amazing possibility, start asking yourself, is it a possibility? Or is it an inevitability, right? I'm not trying to be over, I'm not trying to be too cute here. I'm just saying, there is a way that we, with Mercury, Jupiter in particular, in Saturn's sign, you can very easily polarize and think, well, it's either all optimistic or, the universe is saying no to me, right? So I wanted something and I didn't get it, so it was a big no. Well, maybe the no is a yes, right? Or another way of putting it would be, you have something you're really excited about. If you're so excited about it, ask the question, could I be this excited about it in 2 weeks or 2 years? And again, not to clip the wings, but just to bring in that which we might easily end up polarizing ourselves with later if we don't bring it in now. So these are some of the teachings that I wanted to bring up around, Mercury, Jupiter in Saturn's sign. We have a Jupiter-Saturn theme all year long. We have Saturn-Uranus all year long. And a lot of these things are playing on the same exact concepts of limitation versus possibility and so forth. And understanding how ancient sages held all of these different, almost like philosophical dualities, and how they saw them in light of the eternal soul or the indwelling Godhead. That's very liberating if you want to talk about how they thought of liberation. So I also hope that this takes care of a bunch of emails that I've gotten, from people asking me about, is ancient astrology deterministic, or what do you think about the power of positive thinking and stuff like that? So I'm not into the power of positive thinking. I'm into the power of remembering source, remembering soul, communing with it. And I find that everything in the world, nothing excluded, limitation as well as possibility, it becomes something that I see in the light of God. So that's the practice anyway. So thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this. I'd love to hear your comments in the chat box about how you're dealing with Mercury and Jupiter this week. How do you see this manifest in your life? What lessons or insights are you gaining from it? And feel free to, tell me your stories in the chat box. I'd love to hear from you guys. And we'll be back. Like I said, there's some other really good transits this week. So we will definitely be back with more soon. All right. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.